Alright, what about Wreck of the Pandora? We've just done Voyage. Let's think a little bit about Wreck. First of all, it's like Voyage, I'd say a fairly innovative game. I think, now I may be wrong about this, but I think it's the first of the semi-co-ops. I think it predates the co-ops. And kind of, you see the same kind of elements in it that you see in something like Red November, where, yeah, you know, you're all supposedly working together. Now, why is it a semi-co-op? That's a good question. It could have been that making that step to a full co-op was just too early at this point. But it essentially is. There's the glory aspect of the victory condition seems like such a minor thing compared to saving the ship and the crew that you don't really necessarily want to add that victory condition as too important a thing. You want it to be a very secondary sort of thing. The players all win if they survive, and the one who's heroic, most heroic, even if he dies, kind of wins more, but it's not, and everybody definitely loses if the ship's destroyed. So, within that, it's, to me, very much along the lines that the co-ops have taken, but because, like with Voyage, it's carving out some kind of new territory here, it does so in a kind of clumsy manner. And different issues here, although some are the same. Let's go over some of the same ones. One of them is the components, the little critters with all their modifiers to determining, you know, so to the attribute generation to determine what attributes they actually have. The values on the tools, etc. There's just a lot of numbers there, and especially at this time period, nobody had that kind of number of numbers on a counter. You might have, you know, an attack, morale, move, or maybe even a defense in there or something. But we're talking like, I don't know, looks like 8 numbers on a counter maybe, in some cases. Not quite, 7. 7 for the critters. And they don't count. They're not numbers that you refer to by looking on the board. They're things that let you know what you roll here, and then you have to eventually transfer the actual results onto a record keeping. So that's a little cumbersome. Is it terrible? No, but it involves, like with Voyage, having to flip back and forth through the rules between things, although here, much of the game is referenced on this little player aid sheet here. It's a little small font for my poor eyes now, but when I was younger, this would have been fine, I'm sure. The actual board, I found where the tools were kept a little confusing and hard to reference, and the color counters to handle that. The red, green, yellow, trinary information contained on a binary source. Kind of weird there, right? Well, there are a lot more ways to twist the data than you might think, and determine and gain more information in the system, I guess. The ship representation brings to mind the fact that, gee, and this is just, you know, sort of one of those, well, why would that be the case? The idea that the crew doesn't know what's where. They've all hit their heads so bad they got no idea how the ship's configured anymore. That's a little weird. The tracking of the danger to the ship. This is a weird situation. With the rolls that I got, no cooldown was in place. Now I could have caused one by failing that initial, the start attempt the maintenance officer made at the end of the game. And then that could have set the game in real danger. But as it stood, the game was in no real danger. The science officer had enough power to take out any critters that were on the board, basically. There's something a little weird about the tactical situation, and that's what caused me to kind of jump in, well, to screw up to begin with, and then to jump in and play it as though you can't block unless you have enough speed to do. That doesn't really make sense, and I feel like there's a little bit of gray area in the rules about how that's working. It's not well spelled out, but that's not surprising for an Ares, for one of the magazine games from the SPI era of any kind. It's not too odd to leave some things kind of left to the players to figure out. And in that time, if I had picked this up back when it came out, I would have probably played quite a bit of it, just because I didn't have many games back then. And I think this one would have appealed to me. And I would have come up with solutions to all that. Now, with lots and lots of games and very little time to play them left in my existence, perhaps, and certainly, new ones coming out at a rate that they didn't used to, at least ones that are interesting to me, not just yet another World War II game on the operational level at one map. It's very hard to walk in and say, yeah, I think I'll play this, enough to figure out how it should be played. And that's one of the things, a lot of the older games I've figured out how I should play them. But as I pick up newer games, I'm less and less willing to invest that effort in that. And this one certainly is kind of falling into that realm. It's an odd game. It's got some interesting different systems, but it's a little rough around the edges and I think needs some buffing to be able to play properly. There are some pathological situations that can end up in this game. For example, if you're playing by the rules, if you're engaged with a critter in a solo game and you can't run away, you can't, neither you nor the critter can damage each other, the battle will go on forever, no one will win, no one will lose, nothing will happen, it's over. You're stuck in an infinite loop. And that's a little goofy, and that's why I wanted that ability to run away, go find equipment, be able to change, shake up the game state so something can happen. Well, not by the rules, and attempting to do that kind of hurt things. What about that shutdown procedure? There's a chance you might run into it immediately. There's a chance you might cause it. But there's also a chance that there is not really any pressure at all in this game. No danger of getting wiped out. You can walk around and kind of grab the equipment. Of course, there's the danger you might get caught by a creature who could kill you, or a creature who could, even worse, pin you into fighting forever until you die of old age or something. So I guess there are some risks still in the game if that shutdown period doesn't come in, but it doesn't have the kind of pressure on the game, on the players, generated by the game the way that Red November does. And you don't have an opponent who's doing clever things. So the whole reaction matrix stuff is kind of weird too. I really don't like the way the move and kill options work. Those I feel would have to be modded. So for example, and you could see how effectively I did that with the other thing where I basically damaged the game terribly by doing so. If you get move, you either follow the person who caused it, or if you've got the special kind of move, you'll try to kill them too. Okay, that second kind is great. But if you get a kill, you can't move. So there's a question of, if I move from one area to another, at what point do I roll the reaction? And then what happens? And maybe you have to take that as a kind of, well, it depends on what the result is. If I get a kill result, it actually attacks me, engages me in the room I'm in, even though I'm leaving that room. Whereas if I do a move out of the room, it might follow me. Because there's also the danger with the flee option that it'll flee into the room that you're going into. That doesn't bug me too much. It's running ahead of me or whatever. I don't know. But there just seem to be enough little gray areas that I think with a playthrough or two, you come up with answers. I feel like I've got most of my answers at this point in my own head. For example, that sort of, hey, the reaction takes place at different times depending on when you do it. And that would take a lot to explain in the rules, but becomes kind of obvious as a decent solution after you fiddle around with the game a little bit. I really do not like the semi-co-op victory conditions where the game is almost determined by who successfully brings the ship up powered up. Now, if you're playing a solo game, who cares? If you're playing a two-player game, there may be enough other options for victory conditions that that's not the absolute, but it probably is at 25 points. And if you're playing more than two players, it's almost assured that you're going to win the game. I played a three-player game, and it pretty much nailed it down absolutely. 25 points, that means capturing, let's see, a 3.5 would be your average number of victory points on a full die roll. Let's say a 4, just to be friendly. So you'd need to capture, more than 6 critters to have a reasonable expectation. More than 6 critters more than the other guy gets. So if he shuts it down and is still free to do stuff, you're not going to catch up. He's going to be able to score some points, kill some of those critters that you can't get to. So yeah, overall, I'd say as a game, this isn't that terribly interesting. But, again, at its time, I think I would have played quite a bit of it and had kind of fond memories of it the way I do with Voyage and a number of these other games from that era for me that was very early. And I guess some people have that kind of memory with things like Ogre, which quite simply is not a very good game either. GEV is a little more interesting, but when you look at the components and everything, it comes out far less than this, in my opinion. So yeah, I'm probably going to give this a kind of mid to poor 5 or 6 type rating, just based on the. I'll give it the 6 because I do think that there's something very innovative here in the design. Now, the role-playing games were already out. People were playing, and those are sort of a cooperative type concept. And I think people were already coming up with ideas of trying to put a role-playing game in a multiplayer board game type thing. And that's really kind of what this comes down to. You're playing one character in a troubled situation where you're working together with other characters, but whoever gets the bonus of, the most gold or whatever actually kind of wins the game. How much are you willing to screw your opponents over for that? Yeah, that's a good question, or companions. How do you want to put it? All right, I guess that's about it.